everyone, right?
Present to everyone?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Good to go.
Let's see, do we have anybody there?
No, nobody's in there.
Nobody's in there? All right. All right, so now we are starting. All right, so get a little about version control. Jeff asked me a few weeks ago for some help with version control, and a couple of users at the university have asked me for help. I actually had a meeting today where I spent about 30 minutes working with someone on version control. Why do you need it, right? What is it for? Why Git, so on. So this presentation is a little about version control. We'll get into branching. If you've got your laptops and you want to join in, we can walk through the try Git, work instruction, and let me know if you got any questions. And if I talk too fast, please tell me. All right, so believe it or not, there are still situations where you have, where's your archive? Where's your site archive in case something goes wrong? Within the last 4 months, I have actually had somebody tell me it's in the archive folder, check my desktop. And so that's where everything was. So if they had dropped their laptop at any given time, they would have had no backups. If their computer had been hacked and then they edited the site and the site was hacked because of their computer, they would have no backups. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Version control helps with that. Now, there's two parts of backing up your site if you're in Drupal, right? We have our code and then we have our content. Your content being basically anything that goes in the database, and then anything in your files directory. I think WordPress does something similar as a similar directory. So it's important as we move forward today to separate code and content. Your version control is about keeping a copy of your code, not your content. You can actually use it for your content if you export it into some sort of like a zip file or something, and then use Git to archive that zip file. But for the code base purposes, we're working on code. So let's see. So the short walkthrough we're going to try and go through is regulated code updates is a very useful tool of version control. So if you have a new project that you're working on and you don't want your live site to be altered, but you still need to show off to your client that you have made these beautiful changes, please approve them. You don't want to post those on live because if your client hasn't approved them, you're probably going to get trouble, right? So allowing for regulated code updates means that you can deploy it as soon as you get the approval, as opposed to trying to recreate all your changes. You just say git push, git pull, and it's done. There are no unexpected code rollbacks in production, which is very useful. I had one situation, I cannot remember the hosting environment, but it was a very cheap one. It was only like $5.95 a month, about 6 or 7 years ago. And I had deployed a whole bunch of updates, got the code updated, got the database updated, and moved on. And then the next day, I got a call because the site was down and everything was broken. So they had reverted all of my code to the previous version of code. So they had basically restored a backup. But my database had already gone through the database update hooks, so the two just didn't match. If I had had version control back then, all I would have had to do was pull from master, clear caches, and everything's back online. I didn't, and it ended in pain and sadness. It is an extra step in the workflow initially, but once you get that step done of actually creating your Git repository locally, creating your remote repository for storing your code, and then getting it up on your hosting environment. Although, as I discussed earlier just now, some hosting environments will just hook into your Bitbucket, GitLab, or GitHub, to where if you push your code out to your storage environment, your remote repository, it'll automatically then update your host for you, so you don't ever even have to update it, which is kind of cool. Or update the code. You still have to run your update hooks. Just a pause. Please do not push to master. From the devs, please and thank you. One of the first things I learned the hard way, obviously I'm terrible about learning things the hard way. If you push to master, if you are checking out the master branch, which we'll get into here in a minute, and by the way, am I on voice on here? We're good? Okay. If you check out to master, if you commit a change to master and you push that change up, there's no branching, there's no anything, you have changed your code. There are options to fix it, but it's more hassle than it's worth. So from the devs who will probably have to work with you to support your code, don't push to master. Use a pull request. I found this comic online. I thought it was hilarious. A couple of weeks ago, it's your dev engineer and your front-end developer, your DevOps basically, and your front-end developer, and they're fighting because a customer called in and said, hey, can you go fix this thing on production? And so he fixed it on production and did not put it into the Git repo. And so the developer, the DevOps, backend as it were, said, okay, hey, I'm pushing out changes. He pushed them up, cleared everything out, it updated, his scripts ran perfectly, and all the changes went away. So this is something that can happen, just to be aware of as you move forward, is if you have unstaged changes and you don't commit them, if you clear out your Git repo, they're gone. So always be safe and make sure that you do add your files to Git before you move on. And honestly, if you're asking the last slide of whose fault is it, as the dude who did the DevOps, I'm going to lean towards it's the front-end guy's fault, because theoretically the back-end guy should have had a script that checked front stage changes and then stashed them. Yes, I agree with that, but All right. So this image always brings me sadness and pain. I figured I'd include it so everybody else could have that same sadness and pain. I heard you want to be a web developer. Here are a few devices to test your site on. One of the things Git lets you do, one of the things using version control lets you do, is your site is live. Now give me an environment I can test changes on over and over and over again through iteration, and make sure that it actually works on all of the platforms I want it to work on. Whereas if you are making those changes in iteration on your live environment, you're probably going to get in trouble. Whether it's your boss that gets you in trouble, your customers that get you in trouble, or your boss's boss's boss picking up the phone and saying, yeah, let that guy go. Let that person go. So version control advantages, maximum collaboration. We'll get into the different types of version control here very shortly, a very, very brief version of it. But what Git allows is if I create a branch, test it, it works, I can push it up to GitHub and then say, hey, Patty, can you test this? She can then fetch my changes without altering any of her code. She hasn't messed up what she's working on. She can fetch down my changes, look at my branch, test it, and say, hey, yeah, this is great, and then go right back to what she was doing with no loss of development time. It uses semantic versioning. If you use that functionality, Drupal uses semantic versioning. Most software packages that we've grown into use semantic versioning. So 8.x, 7.x, 8.1.x, and so on. If you use tags to track your versioning, then you can actually tag it and say that this branch works with, let's say, Drupal 8.3.1, which came out today. And so this branch that I just made is tagged for testing 8.3.1. And so you can use the tags to sort of track your progress and see the growth of your programs. Branching and merging is a very useful tool that we'll get into. And I've used the word branch a number of times already. And you're going to see that visually before I try and explain it. Restoring previous versions. Complete long-term history of every file individually. There are other version control software packages out there, and one of them, I can't remember which one, doesn't actually track the individual files. It tracks the directories. And so if you have a file that has moved directories, then it no longer has a history. Does that make sense? Because it's now this file was deleted from this folder, a new file was created in this folder. Git actually stores the history of each file individually. So if you move it from directory A to directory B, it simply stores this file was renamed on this date, at this time, huge timestamp, lots of stuff I'll never look at. It supports very much extensibility and sustainability. Something I always like referring to is if it isn't documented, it doesn't exist. You have the full history of every file. So if somebody gives you a phone call and says, hey, why does this look terrible? And you're like, hey, well, you told me to do it that way. You had me do it on this date 3 months ago. No, I didn't. That was a conversation I had today. I really did. I had that conversation today. And so I brought up the version history, and my comments were, change requested by this person on this day for this. Well, I didn't mean like that. That's fine, and that is fine. But at least you have, especially if you're a solo contractor or working for a client as a developer, you have the history to say this is what was done and this is when it was approved. So it's also very, very useful. Version control disadvantages. It does regulate your code updates. So for example, when 8.3.1 came out this morning with the security update, in a traditional Git approach, you would add that security update to your repo, stage it, set it up on your GitHub or your Bitbucket or GitLab so that it's now part of your repo, and then push it out to your live environment, as opposed to just deleting everything outside of the sites folder and replacing it, right? So it adds a step into your workflows. As we mentioned with the comic a few slides ago, it can cause unexpected code rollbacks in production. If somebody has gone and made a change in production and not added it to the repo, it goes bye-bye. And that's about it. Not having version control has so many more disadvantages than having version control. This image, in my opinion, explains it the best. They changed one line of code. And that happened. So imagine if they had version control, right? They changed that line of code, all of their sites went down. Let's say they have a multi-site environment, and they updated one module because of a feature update. Now all 27 of their multi-site installations are down. This is pretty much what they're locked to without version control, because then they're going to have to go find the old version of the module, download it, delete the new module, replace it, save it, and then upload all of that to their server. as opposed to with version control, you just revert, right? So git reset head, squiggly, and just step back a commit, unstage those changes, delete them, and then push that with a force up to your web host, and boom, all your sites are back up. As opposed to this, which I can watch all day long. All right, so a little background before we dive into, sorry, hold on. I didn't want to do that first. So now I'm going to go into, before we get into the background, I want to show visually how we can very quickly fix a change that we're going to break. All right, so as you can see, I have a file that's just here, right? The something.txt. And it's totally unstaged. Nobody cares about it. And git status, so now it's gone. So I've checked it out. And we'll get into the commands later, so I'm just trying to show conceptual. All right, so I have in my repo a folder I created called playing, which I'm going to jump into. And it has testing.html. So testing.html is hello world, right? And hello world, let me bring up the right one. That's not the right one. That's not the right one either. Did I close it? Oh, it's in this one. Sorry. So hello world.html, this is what my client wants, right? I get a request that says make it blue. So let's see, h1 p tag style equals, hold on, is that right? It's been so long since I've done it outside of a CSS file. All right, so style equals colors blue. So I saved it. And Atom, by the way, there is a Git extension for Atom, so it can show you what files have been changed. So the status, you'll see that the file has been modified. This is bad. Git push origin master. All right, so I just committed to master, which is a terrible fallacy, and it's a horrible, horrible abomination against everything version control. So I have committed a major sin. Why are you in SFTP mode? You should not be in SFTP mode. Sure. I have no idea why that's a thing. Sure. Well, come on. Error. Okay. Commit. Git. Don't say it, Brandon. Don't say it. Who said it? Commit. This may be. There we go. Apparently I wasn't logged in. It looked like I was logged in, but I wasn't logged in.
You think they
Don't say it. Don't say it, Brandon. Brandon tends to recommend other options every time I talk about using Pantheon. Every single time. All right, so is the workflow done? Yay, the workflow's done. Go to Git. Ah, okay. So, Git status. So, Git push origin master. Okay. So, everything's gonna work.
Then you just make a commit on master.
Oh yes, it's gonna give me. What? Sure. Let's go there. I can't get out of him. It added one something to my settings.php file. All right, so we have blue. Come on now. So there's our blue. We have blue. All right. So you saw that I got those changes from local to the server in about 3 commands. Don't get me wrong, Pantheon got wonky for a second and decided I wasn't logged in. Hush, Brandon. But it's about 3 commands. So let's say that when I did that, instead, I left off 5 keys, or I left off the closing HTML tag and the closing body tag. It's not going to load anything. Or I left off the opening body tag. It's not going to load anything. If I want to fix that in a typical FTPN without version control, you actually have to go log into your server and edit the files. For Git, it's a little bit easier. So Git reset. Unless I can not type. So I have undone the latest commit. Git reset head. And now my changes are unstaged. So notice I had to do both because there's the commit I did and then the commit Pantheon did, which their commit was after mine because it happened afterwards. So I had to undo both of those because they were being weird. So git add sites default settings. Adding and so now, let's say that fix was needed to be undone. I have not only undone it, I have fixed it on the server with a couple of commands. No deleting files, jumping all over the place, trying to find everything that changed, because here I'm only working with a single file. Normally, you're working with entire modules. You just updated 7 modules and one of them broke your site. If you get reset head and step back a level, right, you can undo those module updates and preferably deploy them via branches after thorough testing without having to worry about a broken site. I may have to do a force. Yep. Yep, there we go. And I had to force it because I had undone a commit that Pantheon's like, hey, we have this commit. Where is it? I had undone that commit. All right, so back on the slides. And like I said, we're going to go through the try Git tutorial here so we can see it a little bit smoother here in a bit. Trying to keep on the clock though. So a little background. Why Git? Why do we choose Git over all the version control softwares that there might be and might be out there? Because Drupal chose it. At the time, there was already Mercurial, there was already Bazaar, whatever. Git is the one that Drupal chose. I couldn't find the actual threads of where they made that decision because it was like 3 different threads and they were like 50 pages long. So the brains that were at Drupal leadership chose Git, and so that's the version control software that we use. Raise your hand if you have ever downloaded a module from Drupal.org. You have all used Git. All of the files, all of the packages on Drupal.org are actually hosted via a Git repository. It's what? Git. Drupal.git. Git.
cgit.drupalcode.org.
Yeah, cgit, something like that. So if you've ever downloaded anything from Drupal.org, theme, module, code base, you have used Git, although not for version control. All right, so the biggest difference is there used to be a lot of differences. For example, I think Git wasn't as good with storing large binary files. Bazaar did better back then. Mercurial was better for, I want to say, branches of branches back then. But in the interest of continual improvement, they're all roughly the same. It's kind of like Foundation and Bootstrap. If you're front-end people, two of the same coin, just taking a different approach. If you're back-end people, Scald and the media module, same thing, different approach. So that's about it. Linux uses Git, Drupal uses Git. So if you get really, really good at Git, you've got a future as a Linux unit, admin. Couple of comparisons just to give a visualization of what I mean by the differences between Git, Mercurial, and Bazaar. So, and the repositories. So, and this one, just to go over real quick. Don't break, don't break, don't break. Okay, good. Stephanie's on here. Brandon wouldn't kill me. Stephanie, hammers, All right, so real quick, the version control software is what you're using to store your code, right? So you use Windows to have an operating system. And in Windows, you store files. The files themselves are not Windows. Likewise, your Git repository stores your files, but the Git repository is not Git. Does that make sense? Questions, thoughts? That one took me the longest to get, so that's what I'm trying to make sure that it's sort of clear. So for example, if you create a Git repository on GitHub and you pull down a copy of that code, you can then create a repository on Bitbucket and push the code up to Bitbucket just as easily. You can push the code up to, was it Amazon code commit? I can't remember the name of Amazon's version of it. So, Amazon, you can push it up to Amazon's version of it. You can likewise push it up to GitLab. So just because you are using one Git repository doesn't mean that you're locked into it. They all go to the same place. And can anybody tell me what this CMS is? No, I touched Joomla. Pay attention. I circled Drupal. I touched Joomla. No. All right, so super short history. Drupal's previous version control system was called CVS, Concurrent Version Control. And we don't care about it because it's done. The great Drupal Git migration began all the way back in 2009, and it was completed in 2011. So as of 2011, I don't care about CVS, right? That's the way it works, right? All code on Drupal.org is hosted via Git, which is git.drupal.org. I was right. And so anytime you download anything from Drupal, you're actually downloading from the Git repository. CMS Stack, where does it fall? So everybody is really good at all of these things, right? Yes, we're all good at all of these things. Brennan? I think Brennan's the only one I know of in this room that's good at all of these things. Like, some of y'all might actually be as well, but I'm not good at all of these things. So just a quick kind of comparison. You use it to store your code, and you can use package managers to help you manage the Git. So if you wanted to change to a different version of Git, you wanted to upgrade your Git when a new version comes out, you would use your package manager, just like you would theoretically use Composer to update your Drupal. How to Git. Should you use the graphic user interface or should you use the command line? I have had conversations being told which is better. Personally, I think there's strengths in both. And let me give you a quick example why. So the GUI has very efficient review of code changes. So if I pop up SourceTree, which is right here, and I open up my deployment module, you can actually see, if you squint really, really well, because this doesn't get bigger, you can actually see the branch history of my file. And if I want to see what change was made on the commit, I can actually review the files to see what changes were made. I can review it right there. I don't have to go out into my GitHub repo. I don't need a GitHub repo to review it. I can see exactly what the changes are right here. You can technically do that by the CLI. And Patrick Coffey's not here, but he would probably do it by the CLI because he's like a CLI warrior. Like, he has conquered Vim from what I've heard, and I didn't think that was possible. But I'm not that good. So I actually use a combination of both the CLI and command line. By the way, CLI equals command line. I actually use a combination of both the command line and the graphic user interface. Tagging and stashing is also much easier. So if I have this change and it's an altered file, I can click the stash button and it goes away. And then if I want to retrieve that stash, I can actually click on individual stashes, and we'll touch on that here in a moment. I can retrieve them without having to try and fight through the CLI, which is scary. I've been a developer for years, and CLI is still scary a lot of times. Just, it's a thing. A great thing about the CLI using the command line is it's very efficient because you can build out scripts to pair your changes in Git to changes with CLI-based apps like Jenkins and Grunt, Gulp, was it WP CLI, PHP, and Drush. So for example, you make a code change, and instead of saying git push master, you say run update. And your run update script is a set of commands that pushes out to master, pushes from master to your remote host, clears caches on your remote host, and then runs the update script. So you can have all of that done by one command. So it's very efficient to sort of combine tasks very quickly. So it can be executed with other CLI apps. Quick SourceTree overview. Amusingly, I think I just showed you the exact same thing I just showed you because I forgot I screenshotted that. You know, screenshots are awesome. And it is bigger, right? Yeah. So you can see here just a little branch of the 8.x dev. So I'm obviously trying to build an Drupal 8 version of this little module. Theoretically, that's the wrong way to go about it. It should be a completely separate file. But I didn't want to separate it because I have a working Drupal 7 module. When I get a working Drupal 8 module, I'll just create a new repository and dump all that code in there. Next, buzzwords and commands. The biggest thing that I will point out to everyone listening or present, watching, is the cheat sheet down at the bottom. I've used a lot of cheat sheets for Git since I started using it, and the best one I've seen so far is the one from Git Tower, which is linked here. And it also gives definitions of all these different buzzwords. So if you need a cheat sheet like the one that is covered in tea stains on my desk right now, it's like a year old, here's the one I use. Git is the application. So you have Ruby as an application, Homebrew is an application, Word is an application, PowerPoint is an application. In these sets of buzzwords, Git is the actual application you're using. For commands, fetch checks for updates. You will always combine fetch with, you will theoretically always combine fetch with a remote, whether it's Origin, GitHub, whatever you have defined your remote to be. It goes and looks and says, hey, has there been any code changes? Is there any new branches? Is there any new commits? Send them all to me. I want to see. So if you say git fetch master, it's just going to check for changes to the master branch. I actually do that very often on one of my sites. And when I do git fetch, I fetch a specific branch because I've got like way too many branches that need to be deleted and pruned. And so I don't want to see them all. I just want to see if there's any changes. And so if I fetch a specific branch, it only looks for changes to that branch. Git merge takes the updates that you have found in that Git branch and merges them into your currently active branch. And we'll see that live here in a few minutes. Pull is a fetch and merge. It's basically a combined command. So git pull does just as easily as git fetch followed by git merge. Stash saves your current changes elsewhere. I don't ever use stash outside of SourceTree, or well, a visual program, just because it's really, really frustrating to try and find which files to do, because like you can get stash a file at a time, whereas if you're using the graphic user interface, you can click like 7 files and say stash these, and so you don't like have to fight with it. It's easier. Sorry. Rebase, change your starting commit on the current branch, and we'll see I'll try and remember to bring up a visual example of that. But going based on the commits we've discussed already, let's say that your master branch, you create a fork for a feature. During that feature's development phase, your master branch has gotten 12 commits. When you merge your feature back in, you want to make sure that it works with all 12 commits that your master branch has gotten. So if you rebase to the new commit, it'll actually move you forward. And it's very easy to make sure that your new feature perfectly works with what your master branch is now. But if there's anything I can show you from this slide, is that's a really, really great cheat sheet. Decentralized version control. Just a quick, you'll hear differences between centralized and decentralized, or distributed version control. It took me a while to figure out what the difference was. So if it's centralized, there's a single copy of the project. So committing means adding changes only to your remote repository. So on a centralized version, which Git is not, Git is distributed. In a centralized version, everything's out in your repo, and if it breaks, you're done. Right? If somebody deletes github.org or github.com, and that's where all of your code is, nothing stored locally, you're done. But Git, all copies of the repo are complete and full copies of the repo, including all of the history. Which, take that what it will, there are downsides to having the entire history of every single file in the entire doc root forever, right? So if you're trying to back up all your music collection and you've moved the folders, renamed them, changed them over and over again, you have that entire history forever. And it can get very unwieldy. Whereas a centralized, you're not moving around all that code, copies of it. So committing in Git means you're committing locally. So if you say git commit this, it only exists in your local computer. When you want it to be out on your remote or out in your GitHub, you would then push that branch and all changes, all commits on that branch out to your remote. Git and repositories, again, this one took me a while to get. I referenced it already. Each remote will usually have your local repository and your remote repository. So GitHub and your local machine. Pantheon and your local machine. Acquia Cloud and your local machine. Brandon's probably about to plug Amazy because he does that. Amazy.io and your local machine. Woohoo! Right? So your Git repositories can exist independent of your Git application. So when you've been on Drupal.org and you downloaded that file, you actually downloaded a Git repository. It doesn't have any of the Git files because you just got the stuff, but it does. Now, interacting with the Git repository requires using a Git application, whether the CLI or the GUI. So remote repositories that are non-hosts, and I say non-hosts with a caveat that a couple of them actually do, like GitHub. These are the four that I know of: GitHub, Atlassian, Bitbucket, GitLab, and Amazon Code Commit. I have experience with the first two, and I played in the third one for a bit. I couldn't actually figure out how to log in and do anything in the fourth one. Like AWS is scary. It's like a huge mess of, hey, here's all the things you can do. And I couldn't actually figure out how to do anything. So sorry about that. If I had to say the biggest difference between GitHub and Atlassian's Bitbucket, yeah, that's about it. I had to think for a minute. I couldn't think of anything. If you want to see your codes on GitHub, there's one link. You know, all of your branches and how the branches merge in and when they merge in, there's one link. If you want to see the same thing in Bitbucket, there's one link. The two services are very, very similar. The biggest difference would be, to me, from the corporate aspect, Atlassian has the Atlassian packages. They have, what is it, the Jira. They have Code CI. They have Bamboo. They have their wiki. So there's all these different projects that all interconnect with each other very, very well, including Bitbucket. But Atlassian likes working with others because it makes them money, and so they work with GitHub too. So again, not that big of differences. Originally, GitLab was much, 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 much better. for people who love to use Docker and use binaries, pre-built binaries and such like that, because it had room for repositories of like 5 gig and bigger. And what was it, 2 years ago they fixed that on GitHub? Brandon, I don't know. Okay. I always look to him first because he usually knows it. So originally, only GitLab of the 3 of them supported huge 5 gig plus individual files. Like one file that was 15 gigs because it was your image file for your company's development environment. Originally, only GitLab really served for that, but GitHub and Bitbucket do as well.
I have a comment about GitLab.
Yes.
You can have free private repositories on GitLab, which if you're cheap, is nice.
Awesome. Bitbucket has free private repositories for anyone with a .edu email address. So all students, faculty, and staff. And I believe based on today, they just updated to have free up to 5 users. So like I said, I used Bitbucket for the longest time because I was a student. And as a student, I got unlimited free repositories. And then I graduated and I wasn't a student anymore, so I started using GitHub more. And
you can install GitLab on a local server inside your LAN. If that's something you want to do.
yes. Okay, that's kind of cool.
It's super open source. It's open source.
That's pretty awesome. So apparently you can have your own version of GitLab, which is kind of cool. I'll be honest, and I am going to totally admit my own shallowness right here. You can see my laptop if you're not on YouTube. It has the Octocat all over it. I am shallow enough to admit the reason I chose GitHub to use primarily over Bitbucket is because I like the Octocat. Like, that's the thing.
It's a good reason.
Yeah, I mean, a couple examples. Here on the left, we have GitHub. Here on the right, we have Bitbucket. You'll notice all the features are roughly the same. Here's the source code. Here's the source code. Here is the list of commits, and you can see the list of commits from the graphs. Here's your pull requests. Here's your pull requests. So it's very similar functionality between the two. But I will point out, there's your automation tools right there on Bitbucket. So it is a little bit more clear in Bitbucket how to sync up with automation tools. They're there on GitHub, it's just not quite as prevalent. GitHub features, commit log, branch monitoring, issue queue, using GitHub flavored Markdown, wiki, edit on page code editor, which is really, really fun, pull requests, pulse projects graph, Bitbucket features, commit log, branch monitoring, issue queue using Confluence Markdown. I actually haven't found a cheat sheet for Confluence Markdown. Like I mean, it's there, right? It's in the Confluence wiki. It's in this. It's in that. Like the Confluence Markdown is apparently a thing, but I actually haven't found a cheat sheet for it. So if you're looking for using Markdown, GitHub flavored Markdown, there's lots of great cheat sheets for. If that's the deciding factor for you, more power to you.
There's a link when you're typing something on Confluence that gets you to the page where there's a cheat sheet.
Please show me where that cheat sheet is after the presentation. Like, I want that cheat sheet because I'm in and out.
Yeah, if you're creating a page in Confluence, once you're on the edit mode, and you're typing, right underneath the box where you're typing, there's a link there.
Okay, I will check that as soon as we're done because I use Confluence for work and I'm like, why is my links not working right now? They're very similar though. Edit on page code editor, just like GitHub. GitHub had the initial for that one because GitHub had the edit on page code editor when Bitbucket didn't. And then I'll throw it out and say that Bitbucket had SourceTree when GitHub didn't have their version of GitHub Desktop. So it goes back and forth. The Git CLI, quick review. commit, pull, push, fetch, branch, merge, stash. If you learn the first, let's say, 5 commands, you know just about as much as almost anybody else who uses Git. I have to Google it every time I need to do things. So get used to what you can do, not necessarily knowing how to do it. I know that sounds odd, but saying the stance, how do I revert the last commit? If I Google how to revert the last commit, I'm going to find it in Stack Overflow almost immediately of how to do it. Knowing what you can do is better than trying to memorize all the terms. And the reason for the CLI, I'm using SourceTree as a review, is because all SourceTree does, literally, is execute the CLI command, right? I click the commit button, and it says git commit. And it asks, it'll create a pop-up that asks for a commit message. You put it in, you hit save, it does the exact same thing the CLI does. So there's no differences between the two. It's merely how it's represented to you, the user. So pick which one you're comfortable with. Questions? I thought I heard something. All right, quick format. App, command, object, modifier. If you're used to playing in the CLI at all, nobody ever tells you this thing, which drives me nuts. So like Ruby, do this on this object with this modifier, right? Homebrew, do this, or brew, do this on this object with this modifier. That's a thing in Unix commands that is the logical order of operations. So for Git, git command, remote, modifier, branch. So git push origin, which is my remote, master, which is my branch. So git push origin master. Git fetch master. Or git fetch origin master would be preferable. So an example workflow of Jeff has committed some changes. Thank you, Brandon. It was getting really, really warm.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want to say anything because I'm presenting, but I'm like, whew, it's am I on the spot? Where's that spotlight? Whew. So Jeff has made some changes to the app. Jeff pushed it out to the repo and said, hey, Charles, come test this. So I'll say git fetch origin master, git merge origin master, and now I want Jeff's changes to go up to Pantheon because I have approved them. So git push Pantheon branch 1. That's funny. Git add this file, git commit this file, and then git push. Apparently I did it backwards. Who knows? So git rebase, oh, I see what I did. I accidentally committed to master in my example. And I'm showing how to undo that commit to master. See, I outsmarted myself. Let's go back through it. Hold on, let me check the time because I don't want to run you guys over. It's an hour or an hour and a half? Okay, so I'm gonna go really fast. Wow, how did I use up an hour? Like I had planned to go through try git. That's not cool. Okay, so what I have here in the example, to give you a quick one, is I've fetched origin master, I've merged it into master, and then I tried to push a branch to Pantheon. What I really wanted to do was test Jeff's changes to master. So I rebase, check it out. I'm going to merge branch 1, which is what I had pulled from his changes, and then send that out to master. Git GUI. A couple examples, and I'm almost done with the presentation. The best I have experienced is Git Bash, Git Tower, and Git Kraken. For Windows, very good is SourceTree and GitHub Desktop, Git for Windows. And I will predicate that statement with, that was 1.5 years ago. I saw SourceTree working the other day on Windows, and it was amazing, and it actually worked, and it didn't break things. So take what you will from that. But Git is operating system insensitive. You can use Linux, Linux, Windows, or OS X. You're totally fine with any of them. And see more, if you want to see all of your available GUIs, you can actually go to gitscm.com, download GUIs. And if you've got questions, here is the link to try Git. And like I said, I had planned to actually go through this. This is the single best Git learning tool I have come across, except for Atlassian's documentation that just came out a couple of months ago. But it's an interactive walkthrough of creating a Git environment, creating a Git repository, adding code, adding changes, and then committing all of that locally, creating a repo on GitHub, and then sending that local repo you created out to GitHub. So it is a step-by-step walkthrough of the process in Git. Server, local, remote, just to remind the 3 individuals. So you have your host, like DigitalOcean, HostGator, whatnot. That is where your code lives. Generally, except for customer emergencies, you're not going to make changes on the server. Generally, you're going to make the changes locally. You're going to create a pull request in GitHub or Bitbucket. And then once it's approved, it will be merged into master, and then that will then push out to your server. Every now and again, you're going to have the customer emergency where you're going to make the changes on the server, you're going to commit it on the server and on master, and push it back to GitHub. But try to avoid that. Quick example of the 3. Your server is Pantheon, your repo is GitHub, and your local is obviously your local. I've got an example here of the Drupal does it. So I've got my GitHub repo, I've got my GitHub remote, my Pantheon remote, and so if I say git push GitHub master, it's going to send my current commit for the master branch out to GitHub. If I say git push Pantheon master, it's going to push my current commit of master out to Pantheon. So it's an easy workflow for making sure that you can keep track of what happens with your code. Branching. Trying to think if I've got a good picture to bring up for that one, since we're very short on time. Hold on, I'll see if I can bring up a repo to showcase branching. Resources, because no one is an island. The Pro Git book is actually published on gitscm.com. I couldn't translate that thing with 3 translators in 2 hours. So instead, Git Tower's book is also listed here, Learning Version Control with Git. I would highly recommend it. As I linked a few minutes ago, trygithub.io is a really, really great app to sort of learn your way through GitHub. And it is hosted as a full course on Code Academy. So if you want to go beyond just having a copy of your code, and you want to go deep into how to use branches, the best method for using branches, adding tags and semantic versioning, Code Academy has a really great course that you have to pay for called Learn Git. Git Tower, as I mentioned a second ago, has a really great free course, Learn Version Control with Git. Bitbucket has the tutorial I mentioned a minute ago that I was really surprised at how well done it is, called Getting Git Right. And if you want to see examples in action and you have questions, this is the one I use like daily, right? Show me Git Rebase, and it has pictures and infographics and really great examples of how to do things and what not to do. So that's the one I use like all the time. Pantheon.io has their documentation of how to use GitHub and Pantheon together. It sort of showcases the workflow I have here. If you wish to learn about that. More resources. Git Tower has a command line introduction on how to use the CLI instead of trying to use SourceTree or GitHub Desktop. And then Bitbucket has their Learn Git tutorial. And that's the whole thing. So let me see if I can find right quick. So to give you a quick one on one of the reasons I sort of like SourceTree. So if I want to say new repository, and I'm going to say scan directory, I want all of the Git repositories in my sites folder, including their remotes and everything, to be added. Could open. Add repositories. And now they're all there. And you can see right here for the event organizer packet that I have a branch that is actually 4 behind my remote. And it tells me right here that I actually need to pull master if I want to be up to date with my remote repository. Can everybody see that? Yes? Okay. So just click pull, commit merge changes immediately. I want to include the messages. I don't want to create a new commit, and I don't want to rebase. So, okay. Da-da-da, and now we're up to speed. So my branch right here, the venue page fix, is actually now 1, 2, 3, is actually now 4 commits behind, right? So it technically doesn't matter because that particular file hasn't been edited yet in master. But if I wanted to catch it up, I can just say, it is rebase, right? Yeah. I can just say rebase. Are you sure you want to rebase your current changes on this branch? And I'll say OK. And I now have merge conflicts. OK, my bad. Somebody did actually edit that file. So now I'm going to have to go fix that after this meeting. That's funny. Uncommitted changes. So, yeah, look at that. So somebody actually did edit the file. So I don't really want to fast forward that. I think I'm just going to reset. Are you sure you want to discard? Yeah, I do, because I'll figure it out later. So you can do everything in the GUI that you can do in the CLI. And if you're not comfortable with the CLI, I highly recommend it. It's, at times, much, much faster. I'm weird and use the CLI anyway, but that's me. Does anybody have any questions? No? Yes. Was it a helpful tutorial? Did anybody want to see try Git? I mean, we've technically got, we've only got 15 minutes. All right. So I guess we will wrap up here. Apparently, I guess we don't have any questions. Last call. Anything? No? All right. So as a reminder, just to reinforce, like I have to reinforce this, like this is what happens when you don't use version control. And this is what happens over and over and over again if you don't have version control.